I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Welcome back to Rise to Liberty podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. Today's stream was supposed to be actually a couple of days ago, but just the way that life happens sometimes, it just doesn't work out that way. However, that is always the plan. Also, today's stream was also supposed to be a lot earlier, but that's just kind of the way that things happen. However, we are here now. So thank you for tuning in once again. So today's episode is going to be a topic that I didn't think I would have to cover. Something I didn't necessarily want to cover. I just think it's kind of a subject that is kind of overplayed, I guess. I mean, it gets to a point when Netflix does a documentary on it. It just kind of seems like this is something everyone already knows about. That it's, and I would like to cover things that are either completely misrepresented or things like that. But that's actually why I'm ending up covering today's topic, is actually due to a new book that was released. I kind of feel like we have to go over this topic. It is going to be a little bit shorter of a show. We are going to just run through everything real quick. Let's see here. So, for anyone who doesn't know, we are going to be covering the story of Frank Olsen. I do highly recommend the documentary that is on Netflix about it. It's called Wormwood. I mean, there's also an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that covers this story. I mean, you can find the story anywhere, which is why we will not be focusing on this too much. But I did need to get a stream out today, and I do feel like we need to cover this because of the recent book that came out. However, one thing I do want to do before we get too deep, I want to make sure and let everyone know to head over to our sponsor, which is Nadu Shave Co. You will absolutely not regret this razor. There's a reason why, our dads and granddads used these single blade safety razors for so long. I mean, they truly are just superior. This is a product that I personally use, and I couldn't recommend it enough. So make sure and go over to NADEAUSHAVECO.com. Use promo code RISE15 to get 15% off at checkout, and you will not regret it. Now, excuse me. With that being said, let's get into today's topic. So, like I said, anyone just tuning in, we are covering the case of Frank Olsen today. Let's see here. Let's see if I can get this to blow up a little bit. Maybe let's do this. Oops. Here we go. Maybe this will work. That's a bit better. Okay. Excuse me. So, let's just get straight into it, shall we? So, in the early morning hours of November 28th, 1953, a crowd gathered outside. See, it just sounds like I'm coming in just a little hot. Oh, before we dive too deep into this, I guess, before we really get started, this is the book that came out recently, is Project Mind Control. I will, by John Leslie, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. John Leslie. I'm not sure. He is a professor over at UT Austin, I believe. Now, this book is a complete limited hangout. Um, I was genuinely excited to read this book. However, what I will say is that he seems to write it from the perspective of giving Sidney Gottlieb as, or portraying Sidney Gottlieb as a sympathetic character. And I just fundamentally disagree with that on every level. And one of the big things that he covers in this book is the Frank Olsen story, which is why we're covering it today. There will be a full review of this book, and I will be refuting the points that he makes in this, because I find this book entirely egregious. It is just really disappointing. However, it is not all bad. I think with my knowledge of what I know about the subject, there were things that I learned, and I will be covering that in the review of the things I did like. However, the things I don't like far outweigh it. So that is one thing that we will be covering. So anyways, back to Frank Olsen himself. In the early morning hours of November 28th, 1953, a crowd gathered outside of New York's Hotel Statler. A man apparently jumped to his death from a 13th story window. The victim was later identified as a government scientist named Frank Olsen. Olsen left behind a wife and 3 small children. His sons are now grown men and are still trying to find out what really happened to their father. According to Nils Olsen, Frank Olsen's son, Frank worked at Fort Detrick, Maryland, headquarters for the military's biological warfare research and development program, also known as germ warfare. Quote, "My father was a research scientist who was involved with germ warfare, associated with the SO division, which stood for Special Operations. That was the most top secret kind of research that was done out at Fort Detrick. And some of that research was being done in coordination with the CIA." Now, one of the things that John Leslie covers is, or states, is that these two factions were separate. He kind of portrays it as Fort Detrick worked by themselves, and then the CIA worked at Fort Detrick, but not together. And I'm not really sure how he justifies that, because the CIA contracted scientists from Fort Detrick. The CIA had very few people working there that were actually like employed by the CIA, but nonetheless, they subcontracted these scientists. So even though they were working at Fort Detrick, they were in fact employed by the CIA. Of course, not all of them, but the people working in the SO division, such as Frank Olsen, they were most definitely subcontracted through the CIA. So they were CIA employees. However, that is not the framing that John Leslie gives in his book. So Nils said that 2 weeks before his death, his father went to a 3-day conference with some of the colleagues and came home a changed man. The weekend after that meeting, my father was severely depressed. He felt that he did something terribly wrong, and he told my mother he had done something wrong, but he couldn't tell her what, and she asked him whether or not he had broken security. And he indicated that he would never do such a thing, but he felt that he had done something terribly wrong. Frank's boss, Vincent Ruwert, told the Olsens he believed Frank was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Just before Thanksgiving, Ruwert took Frank to New York for treatment. In New York, Frank shared a hotel room with Dr. Robert Lashbrook, a CIA scientist and MKUltra scientist, mind you. Eric Olsen, one of Eric Olsen, another of Frank's sons, said that nearly a week passed before they finally heard from their father. My father seemed a little more peaceful than he had. He made a call to my mother to say he was all right. They went to sleep fairly early, about 11, and then the next thing we know, from Lashbrook is that he was awakened by the sound of crashing glass. Frank Olsen was dead at the age of 43. Investigators determined he had either jumped or fallen to his death, something a young Eric Olsen had trouble reconciling. Quote, I remember as a 9-year-old, and actually for years after that, I was completely stumped and dumbfounded by trying to resolve that alternative. There's a big difference between a fall or a jump, and I couldn't understand how either of them could have occurred. The night manager of the hotel, Armand Pastor, found Frank's death suspicious as well. I rushed out to find Frank Olsen, eyes wide open, looking straight at me, trying to tell me something. He was definitely trying to speak, but there was nothing coming out but gurgles or grumbles. He was in terrible condition, and I stepped back because I had to find out where he came from. I looked up the building and I finally saw a little movement of a window shade. And when I concentrated on that, then I see that the window shade was stuck through a broken window. Armand said he immediately took the police to room 1018A. Quote, and there is Lashbrook sitting on a john in his skivvies, and the police thought to question him. And I heard him say, well, all I heard was a crash. I walked around the room to look around. Nobody ever jumps through a window. They open the window and they go out, not dash through a shade and a sheer drape. You know, there's no sense to that. But the Olsens weren't told about the doorman's suspicions. They were told simply that Frank had a nervous breakdown and jumped out a window. But they believed that for the next 22 years. In 1975, a government commission was formed to investigate past abuses committed by the CIA. Among other incidents, the official report made mention of a scientist who had plunged to his death from a hotel room 10 days after being dosed with LSD. The scientist turned out to be Frank Olsen. A year and a half later, the Olsen family received a formal apology from President Gerald Ford and a check from the government for $750,000. Nils Olsen recalled how he and his family met with the CIA chief, William Colby. Quote, as a result of meeting with William Colby at the CIA, we were given what was supposedly a complete set of documents relating to the events of the last 9 days of my father's life. We learned that he had gone to a retreat in Deep Creek Lake in western Maryland with a group of other scientists. The principle of the meeting was that they were going to be discussing ongoing research, but in fact, there were agents in the CIA who were meeting with them who decided that they were going to give them each a dose of LSD without their knowledge or consent and then see what their reaction was. The Olsens learned that the LSD was slipped into an after-dinner liqueur by either Sidney Gottlieb, head of the CIA's technical service staff, or by his deputy, Dr. Robert Lashbrook. The CIA reportedly feared that the Soviet Union might use LSD on captured CIA agents. Gottlieb believed that his test, quote-unquote test, would prepare American spies for that possibility. The laced drinks were served to 8 of the 10 scientists present. Some of them, including Frank Olsen, were not warned about the test. within an hour, the LSD began to take effect. According to Nellis Olsen, when Gottlieb told the group that their drinks had been spiked with LSD, his father became angry. Quote, "We understood that my father was quite agitated and was having a serious confusion with separating reality from fantasy." Less than a week later, Frank made his fatal trip to New York, supposedly suffering from a nervous breakdown. Frank was taken to see Dr. Harold Abramson, an LSD expert who worked extensively with the CIA. That part's important. Accompanying Frank was Robert Lashbrook and Frank's boss, Vincent Ruwert. Frank remained in New York and over the next several days made repeated visits to the doctor's office. Eric Olsen said his family was dubious about the supposed treatment. Quote, "It's impossible to deduce what was accomplished in those meetings, and you certainly don't see any indication that a treatment process was occurring. You can suspect that some kind of assessment process was going on, the process of which was more to protect the CIA's interest than it was to help my father. That is very clear." Nellis Olsen said his father was exhibiting strange behavior. Quote, "One of the nights that my father was up in New York, he was having delusions that he was hearing voices, and in the middle of the night he woke up and went and threw all of his identification out and his money." Apparently, the pattern continued in the immediate aftermath of Frank Olsen's death. For some unexplained reason, Robert Lashbrook never phoned for help. However, according to Armand Pastor, once again, the hotel employee, Lashbrook allegedly did make a disturbing phone call, which was overheard by the hotel operator. Quote, "In those days, all of the calls were manual. You call the operator and you tell her what number you want, and she would dial it for you. And then she listened to see that you got connected. When the men in the room called this number, he said, 'Well, he's gone.' And the man on the other end said, 'Well, that's too bad.' And they both hung up. I mean, what's more suspicious than that? You don't have to be a genius to figure out that there's something amiss. Or, Hamlet said, 'There's something rotten in Denmark.' I mean, I knew there was something rotten at the hotel that night." In 1993, Frank's widow, Alice, passed away. Eric and Nellis had their father's body moved to rest beside her. But before Frank was reinterred, they asked forensic scientist James Starrs to perform an autopsy. Quote, "Quite frankly, we had no idea what the condition of the remains would be after 41 years. We were delighted that the remains were in perfect condition for our analysis." As part of his overall investigation, Professor Starrs and his colleagues went to the old Hotel Statler. The first thing that Professor Starrs looked for was evidence that Frank had indeed smashed through a window. According to Starrs, quote, "The medical examiner in New York, who had done the external examination back in 1953, said that there were multiple lacerations on the face and neck. At some point, he had to hit some glass. I cannot believe that he wouldn't have gotten cuts in the lower extremities of his body. On the front of the legs, we don't find any cuts." Eric Olsen said that the new findings is further proof of a continued cover-up. Soon after that finding was made public, Lashbrook changes his story, which he's held to for 40 years, and suddenly now starts saying that he can't remember whether the window in fact was open or closed. After years of research and investigation, the Olsen family has become convinced that Frank Olsen was murdered by agents of the US government. The Olsens believe Frank was silenced because he had become extremely critical of illegal top secret programs and policies of the CIA and US government, with which his own research group was deeply involved. Frank Olsen's family hopes that someday the entire story will be exposed. So, with that being said, back to Project Mind Control by John Leslie. In fact, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. You know, I really should have had this pulled up, but anyone who watches this show knows that's just not how we do things around here sometimes. There's always something I forget to pull up. So let's see. Watch later. Let's see here. So I'm trying to find. Okay. So we are going to pull this up real quick. Let's see. Stop sharing that screen. Okay. 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 Here we go.
And what you think what actually happened, because we don't know for sure.
Okay. Well, so this is Michael Shermer from Skeptic Magazine. For anyone who's curious, we actually do have a much better idea of what happened. And what's really interesting about what John Leslie says here is at the end of this interview, he says that we actually know quite a bit about MKUltra. We know everything about what it is and what it's not. And we have all these documents and all these books that were written. But then Michael Shermer says something like, oh, well, we don't actually know what happened to Frank Olsen. Well, actually, we kind of do. We kind of do know exactly what happened to him. What up, JC? Good to see you. So, for anyone just tuning in, Michael Shermer just asked John Leslie, what happened to Frank Olsen? Tell me what you think happened. So let's listen to his answer, and then let's go through why he's wrong.
Yeah. So this is 1953 still, I think, right at the creation of MKUltra, several scientists within the CIA, including Sidney Gottlieb, who leads in MKUltra, Robert Lashbrook, his young kind of chemist colleague, and several others, they occasionally meet with several scientists from Fort Detrick, which is the country's biological warfare installation. They get together at a retreat called Deep Creek, and they share information with each other. What are you working on? Can we use this?
Okay, so first of all, these doctors that they meet with regularly, they are employees of the CIA. That's where he's already wrong. So it's not like two separate entities like he's portraying it. They work for the CIA.
This, it's just a work retreat. However, at this one work retreat, Sidney Gottlieb and Robert Lashbrook decide that they are going to spike the liquor with LSD, pass it out to everyone there, or not quite everyone, because there's one guy who's a reformed alcoholic and they're not going to give him any. There are a couple of people who don't get it, but for the most part, everyone gets it except 2 people. And they want to observe basically how it's kind of like a prank. It doesn't sound like a fun prank, today. This is awful, but I think the way that Sidney Gottlieb and Robert Lashbrook were thinking about it as, we played pranks around the office. We're going to spike, some LSD into this liquor and kind of see how people behave. So that's what happens. After
Or they had the intention of targeting someone.
about 20 minutes after the LSD is put in the liquor, people start drinking it. Sidney Gottlieb announces, we've just given you, this hallucinogen. I just want to let y'all know, and blah, 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 so let's see how this plays out. They start seeing colors. The room starts spinning. Most people, after a few hours, they go to bed, except for Frank Olsen, who can't sleep that night. He is one of the scientists from Fort Detrick, who is
He also forgets about the fact that Frank Olsen freaked out when this was mentioned to him. So Frank Olsen has a very big problem with being spiked.
involved in the airborne distribution of pathogens, like helping to create different kinds of biological weapons.
Yes, so he is correct here. Frank Olsen was involved in the creation of airborne pathogens, thinking Operation Popeye, Operation Sea Spray, these sorts of operations that took place under the guise of national security and, finding out what weapons could be, or if, the Russians were to launch a biological weapon, what would happen, except for the CIA just launched, a biological weapon and then a bunch of people got sick, but he doesn't mention that.
But he apparently has this terrible reaction to the LSD. It's almost like it induces a psychosis in him. After they return home from...
Okay, so quick thing about this. Yes, LSD actually does have some negative side effects. It will actually do some really bad things to certain people. Some people take it and are completely fine. Others, they take it and it brings out something in them that was always kind of, I guess, dormant. But because of the LSD, it just kind of brings it out in them. So yeah, it's not meant for everyone. Not everyone should do it. In fact, I don't think really anyone should do it. But you're all adults. Do whatever you want. However, it can have some really nasty side effects. And the CIA knew this at the time when they were secretly dosing these scientists. These CIA scientists at the time, they knew the negative side effects of this. Also, if on the off chance that Frank Olsen was actually targeted and not just, some scientist that happened to be there that happened to be part of this prank, and he was actually targeted, he is literally sitting around with a bunch of spooks who know how to use this stuff and know how to use this stuff in a way to harm people. So if he's going to have a negative reaction and he's being targeted, I mean, he's kind of with the people who know how to do that.
In the retreat, his wife notices that he's not behaving the same. She has a talk with him and asks him what's going on. And he basically just says, I messed up the experiment. I messed it up. They don't like me. He's paranoid. He goes to his boss's office and he says the same thing. Like, I'm sorry, I messed up the experiment. You should just fire me or I should just quit.
He was not concerned about messing up this experiment up at, was it Deep Lake? He was not concerned about that. He was concerned because he was dosed by a bunch of people he knew didn't really like him.
And the boss is wondering, what are you talking about? You're a good employee. I'm not going to fire you. But something psychologically seems to be wrong with Frank Olsen by this point. So Sidney Gottlieb, Robert Lashbrook, and a couple other people who are associates decide that they need to send Frank Olsen to a psychiatrist, if he's not quite a psychiatrist, but a guy named Harold Abramson, whose office is...
Harold Abramson, an LSD expert at the time. Very few in the world, but there were some. He was also an MKUltra doctor. So he was getting funding from the CIA to run MKUltra experiments. So yeah, let's send this colleague who we view as a security threat, mind you. Frank Olsen before this was talking about leaving the CIA. They viewed him as a security threat. So let's take him, let's dose him, let's give him a bad trip, which is easy to do if you know what you're doing. And then let's send him to one of our doctors who's on our side.
This is in New York. Harold Abramson has connections to the CIA already. He already kind of knows about these LSD experiments, so that's good for the CIA. So he's not going to leak this stuff. He's already kind of informed.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So a few people accompany Olsen to New York to see Harold Abramson. And Abramson explains that he thinks Olsen is in some kind of psychotic state that was induced by this LSD experiment. It then becomes Thanksgiving, and so the scientists decide to return to Washington, D.C. because they're going to meet with their families. But as soon as they land back home, Olsen is in this like paranoid state again, and he says, no, I need to go back to New York. And so they fly him back to New York, and while they're,
Except he didn't say that he needed to go back to New York. They told him he had to go back to New York. They told him, they forced him back. He wasn't going to go back. He was going to stay home and work it out. And no. They told him, you have to go back.
He meets with Abramson again, and Abramson says, how about you go to like a psychiatric hospital or something? You know, I can book you into one. And he agrees to it. So they schedule for him to go to one. However, it doesn't have any rooms available that night, so they have to wait an extra day. So they spend the next day, they spend Thanksgiving, basically, Olsen does.
Just hanging out with a bunch of spooks all day. And while he's on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
With one of his colleagues.
And mind you, these spooks, these CIA agents, they were dosing people all over the world. And they were doing it so they could discredit people, so that they could get information from people. And at this point, these CIA agents also had learned techniques from a sleight of hand magician to dose people. So they were just slipping people Mickeys left and right all the time. That's actually, I do agree with the fact that I think they did think it was a prank. However, I think Frank Olsen was there. The entire point of him being there was because he was targeted, and we'll get to why in a minute.
And the next day, they go to bed, and at 2:30 in the morning, Olsen jumps out the window through the glass and the screen on his 10th floor hotel window and falls down and dies on the pavement. So that's kind of...
Okay, so he jumps through the he jumps through the blinds, or not the blinds, but he jumps through the drapes, the blind and the window. Because in what we read, the author made a good point that when somebody has the intention of jumping for the intent of offing themselves, deleting themselves, they open the window. They don't jump through all of that. That doesn't make sense. Also, the medical examiner made a very good point that you would also see lacerations on his legs. So,
encapsulated the Frank Olsen story, precipitated by this LSD experiment at Deep Creek. Frank Olsen's son, Eric Olsen, he thinks that that's not quite the story. He thinks that the CIA was intentionally trying to kill his father.
That's not the only person who thinks this, by the way.
And in fact, there was someone else in that hotel room that pushed Frank Olsen out that window. Frank Olsen...
Robert Lashbrook. Not just somebody. Robert Lashbrook. The person who dosed him in the first place. Not just somebody.
Didn't jump out the window. He was pushed. He was intentionally murdered, partially because maybe he knew something about the U.S. using biological weapons in Korea and had moral qualms about it, and somebody wanted to silence him, so this didn't become a big story.
Okay. now he says, well, maybe he knew something about what, the CIA or the military using biological weapons, but he was working at Fort Detrick. If anybody knew, it would have been him. He was part of the SO department at Fort Detrick, the most top secret level that you can get to. And if anyone knows anything about the categories, secret, I mean, normal military people have secret clearance. But when you have top secret clearance, you're into some heavy shit. Frank Olsen had top secret clearance at Fort Detrick, which is where they were building biological weapons. Okay. So it's not like he might have known. If the USA was doing it at all, Frank Olsen would have known. We'll get to that in just a minute.
That's what Eric Olsen thinks. I don't think that's the case. I think Frank.
Okay, John Leesley, why do you not think that that's the case? Let's hear why you don't think that Frank Olsen deleted himself and that he wasn't targeted.
Olsen did commit suicide. I think he took this LSD. I think he did have some kind of psychotic break. Another piece of evidence that.
Okay, yes, I will agree with that. He did have a psychotic break. But why was it not intentional? What makes you think that it wasn't intentional, that he wasn't targeted?
People will point to for the Frank Olsen death.
Oh, okay. So here's the one piece of evidence he says that exists that people point to for the reason why people don't believe Frank Olsen deleted himself. This is the piece of evidence that everyone points to, apparently.
Potentially being a murder is that in 1953, the CIA writes this assassination primer. It's this book that explains like how to conduct a proper assassination that won't lead to anyone discovering what happened. And one of the main suggestions it has is a fall from a tall building is especially effective, so,
Yes.
it lines up perfectly. Like he fell from a tall building and this primer in 1953 is saying that. Again, I think it's more a matter of correlation than, something else.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just cover this real quick. Okay. So the CIA writes a manual on assassinations. One of the ways to assassinate somebody is a fall from a tall building. A Fort Detrick scientist falls from a tall building. The only other person in the room at the time was Dr. Robert Lashbrook, the person who dosed him the week before. Or I guess it would have been 2 weeks before. Okay, so the only other person in there is a MKUltra CIA scientist that works hand in hand with Sidney Gottlieb. They have a manual that says push him out of a window. That's a good way to assassinate somebody without it being traced back to you. Now there's all these other things, but that has nothing to do with this apparently. Apparently that doesn't mean anything, according to John Leesley. That's just a correlation doesn't equal causation sort of a thing. Okay. Well, let's finish up with what he has to say, and then we'll get to what the truth actually is.
So I don't really buy into this story that he was intentionally killed. There are other people, I mentioned a couple in the story, who take LSD unwittingly like Frank Olsen, and the same kind of thing happens to them. They have kind of a psychotic break. One woman is committed to a mental institution for basically the rest of her life. After this, there are multiple people who this kind of thing also happens to. So I think it's more probable that Frank Olsen was just unfortunate and had that kind of bad trip that produced that psychotic break than it is that someone is orchestrating and masterminding this assassination against him.
Except for the people that he brought up didn't die. So, okay. Now, we've heard what he thinks, okay? Now, let me read you a passage real quick out of a book. I highly recommend purchasing this book. And this is Drugs as Weapons Against Us by John Potash. Let's see here. 2 years earlier, in 1953, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb used LSD as a weapon on an important CIA scientist named Frank Olsen. Olsen headed key biological warfare experiments at Camp Detrick, now Fort Detrick, in Maryland. U.S. intelligence considered Olsen a serious security risk after he helped guide Air Force testing of anthrax-like spores on people in Antigua and Alaska. Less dangerous spores were tested in San Francisco and many other cities. The family of one man claimed these spores caused their father's death in a case that was taken to the Supreme Court. Interesting. We're talking about Operation Sea Spray. So Frank Olsen helped with Operation Sea Spray and his office. U.S. intelligence first interrogated Olsen in 1949, but had darker plans for him by 1953. Something John Leslie didn't mention, did he? The closest to Olsen reported he became very disturbed about the Air Force's use of biological weapons he had worked on in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. Olsen also voiced strong misgivings about taking part in some of the early MKUltra experiments in Germany, where he had joined other CIA and Nazi scientists, including concentration camp experiments in interrogating agents from the Soviet Union and East Germany. These interrogations involved the use of LSD and other drugs. They also involved fatal torture. Olsen's close friend and former military scientist colleague, Norman Cornier, said Olsen returned from that trip to Germany very distraught. In a documentary film, codename Artichoke, Cornier, I believe it's a French name, which is why I suck at pronouncing it. Anyways, related that in 1953, Olsen told him that witnessing people tortured to death led him to prepare to resign from his CIA post. What sounds more likely? Okay, there's a little bit more here. Hank Albarelli wrote a 800-page book on Frank Olsen's murder at the hands of the CIA. Albarelli conducted hundreds of personal interviews that sifted through decades of government documents. Albarelli's book, A Terrible Mistake, presented overwhelming evidence that the highest levels of the CIA wanted to silence Olsen. They not only wanted to stop him from speaking out on the operations cited above, but also, and more particularly, for exposing of Project Span, an operation involved in the 1951 aerosol spraying of LSD on a town of Point Saint-Esprit in France, which resulted in several deaths and many injuries. Two CIA sources, among others, confirmed to Albarelli that MKUltra Dr. Sidney Gottlieb targeted Frank Olsen with LSD and other interrogating drug, and another interrogating drug at a retreat near Camp Dietrich on November 19, 1953. After the interrogation, Olsen remained highly confused and disturbed. The CIA then sent Olsen to New York to see a Columbia University professor, Harold Abramson, MD. Abramson was also a major in the Army, working as a part-time consultant to the Army Chemical Corps as part of Operation Artichoke, which officially became part of MKUltra in April of 1953. On November 28th, 9 days after his interrogation, Frank Olsen fell from a 10th floor room of the Statler Hotel in New York City. A CIA agent was found in his room moments later. Albarelli's book and the film, codename Artichoke, present overwhelming evidence that CIA agents threw Olsen out of the window. According to notable forensic doctors, Olsen suffered blunt trauma to the head that killed him before he was thrown from the window. Pretty convenient how he didn't mention any of that, isn't it? John Leslie also mentions this incident that took place in France, and he explained it away as the bread in this town actually being Let's see if I can find that real quick. Let's see. So he explains it away that the bread was actually the bread that everybody in the town ate was actually just covered in the very type of mold that LSD comes from. Let's see right here. So this is from John Leasley. This is page 30 of his book. The CIA didn't experiment with LSD until 1951. Wrong. 1947 was when they started. Or actually, no, it would have been a little bit earlier because Frank Olsen was in Germany with the Nazis running MKUltra experiments. So officially, the MKUltra documents say 47. So as far as when they actually started, I think it was probably not too far after. Let's see, it was first synthesized in 43. So it would have, or maybe it was 42 or 43. So it wasn't too long after that the CIA would have learned about this. So he's already wrong there. So LSD comes from a fungus known as ergot. So right here it says, on August 16th, 1951, dozens of residents of Point Saint Esprit, I don't know, a sleepy French town dotted with medieval buildings, began experiencing vivid, nightmarish hallucinations. True. One man jumped into a river because he thought that snakes were coming or were eating him alive. Another told the doctor that his heart had fallen out of his chest and begged him to put it back in. Yet another ripped off his clothes and danced naked in the town square. A reporter from Paris noted, quote, "The doctors were beside themselves with work. The rumors are wild and contradictory. Fear hangs over the town everywhere. No one knows when it will end. 5 people ultimately died." That part is true. Now, here's what's not true. All of the victims had eaten rye bread that had been contaminated with ergot fungus, except for the fact that even if you eat ergot fungus, it will make you sick, but it won't make you hallucinate. So maybe John Leasley should have done a little bit more research on LSD if he was going to lie about this. However, one thing that Frank Olsen helped with, let's see, where was it? Project Span, which there are documents for. Mind you, Project Span, an operation involved in the 1951 aerosol spraying of LSD on a town in France, which resulted in several deaths and many injuries. So it's things like this in this book, Project Mind Control. I mean, there's just, I was so excited for this book. And granted, the point of this episode was not really to focus on Project Mind Control because I will be doing a full review. I'll be getting the documents. We'll be going through bit by bit of everything where he's wrong. And we will go through all of this to point out, you know, what exactly he is wrong about. But we did have to talk about Frank Olsen. This is a major story. This is one of the very first stories that anyone ever hears about MKUltra. Okay. And it is incredibly important to go through and actually understand what happened to Frank Olsen. For anyone who was curious, this article that I wrote did come from Unsolved Mysteries. So go check out the episode by them, or you can just find this by, using a search engine. Also, we don't have time to get into this today, but we will get into this at another date. There is the Frank Olsen Project. Let's see, I believe it's .org. Let's see real quick. FrankOlsenProject.com. And there's actually a timeline of the events. And it's interactive. You can go through. Frank Olsen is recruited to Camp Dietrich in 43. Camp Dietrich, U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. Goes through. The government purchased additional land for Dietrich Field and renamed the facility Camp Dietrich. The facility became the site of the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, which is still there. It was responsible for researching biocontaminant decontamination, gaseous sterilization, and agent purification. The first two commanders, Lieutenant William S. Bacon and Colonel Martin B. Chittick, managed the initial $1.25 million construction budget of the new facility. CIA starts initiating chemical warfare projects. This is 1945. I mean, come on. I mean, even this timeline right here just refutes everything that Leasley claims in his book. And what's interesting is for somebody who is a researcher, right? Somebody who is a history professor, which John Leasley is. He's a history professor at UT Austin. I mean, this is just such basic information on this subject. Maybe it's because this is all the information that I research. Like at this point, with how borderline obsessed I am with this topic, I would say, you know, people could largely categorize me as an MKUltra researcher. And there's just basic information that he either got wrong or blatantly lied about, of which I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's misinformation or disinformation, but it's just so easily verifiably wrong. And also, if you read the MKUltra documents, I mean, even the things that he's covered so far are wrong. So I don't know about that. Anyways, CIA begins its study of LSD, 1947. So even this timeline says 47. John Leasley says 53. So, I mean, take that for what it is. I'm just not even sure what else to say about it. However, this Frank Olsen project does have a section on here. All the documents. Go and read all the documents. Everything that that they have. Project Artichoke, Special Research Project Bluebird, MKUltra LSD study funding. Let's see, a subproject 16 was under budget, and therefore an additional subproject was needed to fund the maintenance and facilities. Let's see, October 2nd, 1953. Camp Dietrich, 1953. Deep Creek Memo, page 1, page 2. MKUltra Program CIA document, 54. I mean, they've got all the documents you need. Let's see, July 1975 lawsuit, a letter sent to John Warner informing him that Daniel Radofsky would not be a good trial lawyer. I mean, they've got literally every document that you are going to need. Colby documents, special counsel letters, mysterious letter. CIA declassified the material on Frank Olsen case. If you dig through these documents, it is very clear that Frank Olsen was murdered. And it's very clear that the CIA did it. So, John Leasley, I'm wondering, why did you not look at any of these documents, and why are you blatantly lying to people? This is insane. Like I said, we will be going through this at a later date. At another time when I've had time to prepare with all the documents, because I want to be able to show with documented proof that this is wrong. I don't want to just say that it's wrong and then not show proof. However, I am showing this right now, so you can go find the documents yourselves. I can't do all the work all the time. I'm only one person. However, I am going to put together a presentation to show exactly why this book, Project Mind Control, is wrong and what he's wrong about. So, with that, I will get down off my soapbox for now. Let's see. Do we have time to get through this? See, I don't think we do. Let's see. We're at 1 hour. Like I said, tonight was definitely going to be a little bit shorter of a show. But because I didn't get to Sunday's show, I will be doing a show tomorrow, probably another shorter show like this. So let's see what I think we'll do. Okay. This is what I think we'll do. We'll get out of here for tonight. On that, let's see. Yeah. So we're going to get out of here for tonight. And then tomorrow I'm going to go through and talk about what I wanted to on Sunday. I think, 2 shows right back to back, probably an hour long there as well. So we'll get 2 hours, but then I don't want to push myself too hard tonight and drain my reserves, so to speak. I will say doing these shows, it's definitely not the easiest thing. It definitely takes a lot out of me. So, and I'm not looking for sympathy. I love doing this, and I appreciate everyone that watches and supports the show. It means the world to me. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure and be able to give you guys the best information possible, the best content possible, and, I just know my limits. So, on that, I think we'll get out of here tonight. Let's see, it's a little after 7:30. Seems like our buds over at almost or already dead or streaming. So make sure and go hop over and go watch Jose and Austin and Jules. Go check them out. That's probably where I'm going to go hop over to while I do all the stuff on the back end. Get ready for tomorrow's stream. So tomorrow's stream, I'll set it up tonight. Check out all my socials and everything. We'll do it much earlier in the day, but we'll just plan on that. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone for, let's see, just getting a couple of things pulled up real quick. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in to another episode of Rise to Liberty. Let's see. I would like to remind everyone that to help out the show, you can head over to risetoliberty.com/coffee. And this is the best way to help the show. The best way financially, go over there. I need all the help I can get. This show is actually kind of expensive to run on the back end. So any help is always appreciated. However, I do understand times are tough, but I am trying to offer as many options as possible for all different price points. Head on over to risetoliberty.com/coffee. Buy me a coffee, make a one-time donation, reoccurring donation, whatever you would like. You can also head over to risetoliberty.store and go check out some new merch. I just dropped the Mind Control design. It's nice, 60s design. And there's 2 different price point t-shirts. Like I said, I am working on dropping getting the price lower so it's a bit more affordable. But they are just 2 different quality t-shirts. However, they are both high quality t-shirts. It's just a little bit different if you want it a little bit softer, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, head on over to either of those options. I definitely appreciate it. Make sure and check out our sponsor, Nadu Shave Co. Those guys are always awesome. They have the balls to sponsor this show, and we couldn't do it without their help, without your help and patronage. Other than that, make sure to go to risetoliberty.com/links. That's our master link for everything. Once again, stream tomorrow. It's going to be about this long. And until next time, stay free.